Above Ground Podcast, episode 136. Annah Elizabeth, I Will Survive.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Are you ready to lace up your boots, throw up your horns, and jump into the pit? Then let's stomp the stigmas of mental illness. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now, Will Foley and Timothy Patrick.
Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast. Above Ground Podcast.
Because you can't serve below.
We are on Zoom this morning, and Tim and I are very, very grateful to have our guest this morning. Our guest is Annah Elizabeth, and wow, dude, why don't you take it from there? I've got just the regular notes here, so you may have a little bit more to...
I don't probably have much more notes than you. I just I'll just give a quick little story. We were doing our own episode on healing, and I usually try and get like a little skeleton before Will and I get together, and then we compare stuff and we just, have open conversation. But anyways, I was searching the good old fashioned interwebs, and I found this thing called 5 Facets of Healing. And I started reading through it, and I was like, this makes a lot of sense. Right. So I'm kind of like, I was writing some stuff down, and I go to the bottom and it says Annah Elizabeth. And I'm like, well, instead of just like, telling people about, her stuff, maybe I can find her and get her to tell our listeners about her stuff. It seems a little bit, seems a better way to do it. So anyways, long story short, I contacted Annah, and she responded and obviously agreed. And here we are today. And as Will said, we are super grateful to have you here.
Thank you. I'm super grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for the work that you guys do. Since you reached out, I've been listening to your podcast, and actually connected with one of your other guests, and
oh wow, cool.
you guys are doing is phenomenal. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Awesome. So I was kind of, if you don't mind, we can just jump right in and start kind of, how you kind of started, to create this 5 Facets of Healing.
Yeah. So it's, as with everybody's story, it's an interesting journey, right? It began unbeknownst to me, like in childhood. What is that saying? Nobody gets out of childhood unscathed. I think something like that. But I never really thought about it. And then on May 11th of 1990, my first child was born, and he also died on that same day following unexpected delivery complications. And I remember thinking, just hours after I learned that he had died, that I didn't want to spend a lifetime mourning him. And what I say is, I didn't know what that meant, what it looked like on the other side, or how the hell I was ever going to get there. And I hope that doesn't offend our listeners, but I knew what I didn't want, and I went kind of from there. And over the next 7 years, I would go on to experience 2 second trimester miscarriages, 3 more complicated but successful pregnancies, a 6-week psychiatric stay for severe depression. And in that final pregnancy, 6 weeks before that child was born, I discovered that my husband and my best friend were having an affair. There was a period of time I had suspected for about a year, and I kept being told that I was delusional, that I was crazy, that I was imagining things, that I was a drama queen. So that was when I really got serious, in that morning. And I write about this in my book, Digging for the Light, which remind me, gentlemen, I got to come back to Digging for the Light in your Above Ground podcast title, because when you reached out to me, like, I got chills. But that morning I found out about the affair. I just collapsed on my kitchen floor up against my washing machine. And for hours I sat there and I just kept waiting for the world to swallow me up. And, I'd had this prayer, God, that I can't take any more. They say you don't give us more than we can handle. And, I can't commit suicide. So please take me. And I would wake up in the morning and, there was a short period of time, but I thought, I can't get living right and I can't get dying right. Where am I? And after hours of sitting on the floor, just waiting for the world to swallow me up, and it didn't. And I joke, right? At the time, it was no laughing matter, but now I can joke about it. And say, I sat there, I'm like, okay, nothing's happening. These prayers aren't going to be answered either, and it's not going to be fixed with you sitting on the floor. What are you going to do? And I thought, okay, you're going to get up and you're going to make a phone call. And that phone call led me to another phone call that led me sitting down within a day in front of this woman who said that, basically she said I was not being punished. God wasn't punishing me for anything, and God wasn't choosing that these things happened to me, that when they were happening, he was actually wrapping his arms around me and crying out in pain with me. Now that, my spiritual evolution then kind of became there. But so on each of those journeys, right, each of those lost events, I had one question, and that was, how is it that some people go on to live happy, fulfilled lives following tragedy, mishap, or mayhem, while others succumb to drugs, despair, a life of void, or suicide? And that question spawned countless other questions. And when I wrote my memoir, Digging for the Light, I did hundreds of edits on it before I finally hit that publish button. And one day I was editing it, and I came across the quote that I had written about the morning I found out about the affair. And it said, every piece of hope I'd ever held on to before had just been shredded. My faith in people, in God, in trust, every spiritual, emotional, physical, social, and academic part of me laid in a heap to be tossed out with the garbage. It never made it to the garbage. I recycled it instead. And when I read that quote, all of a sudden, those 5 things became neon. And this little voice said, that's it. And so I started pursuing, okay, I knew that there was something there. Then I realized there was something inside of each person that we tap into, that we're able to draw from. But I also realized we're born with it. And so from that, the initial 5 facets was birth. And so just real quick, if I may, that we're all born with the exact same gifts. It's just the details that comprise them are different. So the academic facet, and these are just in alphabetical order because it's easier to remember that way. The academic facet is an ability to learn. We all learn differently, but we all have an ability to learn. The emotional facet is an ability to feel. The physical facet is 2-pronged. We're born into a physical body and a physical environment. The social facet is the ability to connect to the world around us in some form or fashion. And that's people, places, and for alliteration, plants and pets, right? So animals, nature, place, people, and we all connect differently. Some people connect more to animals than people, but we all connect in some way. And the last one is the spiritual facet, which is the divine self within, and that's separate from religion. Religion can be a support resource for the spiritual facet. So for the first 10 years of this program, I went around the country, just whenever I could rub two nickels together to get someplace and find somebody who would listen. And I shared that topic. And one day this little voice was like, okay, it's great to tell people that they have what they need within them to heal whatever they face, but what do they do with that? So that question spawned countless other questions. Lo and behold, slowly but quickly, the 5 Facets of Healing was birthed. And it's a 5-part program that helps people gain insight into the conflict that comprises their grief and to identify where they want to go. You know, one of the things that I say when we're stuck, we're like overwhelmed, it's because there are so many moving pieces. And I talk about it like an umbrella. And within that umbrella are so many things that we can't identify or don't identify. And that's what causes the overwhelm. So this program is designed to help methodically help people pinpoint and identify those things. So to gain insight into themselves.
That is quite the story. I know Will's got something, but I gotta ask this quick. When you were lying in that heap, as you say, that woman spoke to you and said how God was embracing you, basically. How hard was that to comprehend in your state of mind at that moment?
Actually, it was very easy experience. I mean, that's just the best way to describe it. I actually felt invisible arms wrap themselves around me. It was a profound experience for me. And in that moment, it helped me realize that, again, I wasn't being punished. For a while, I felt, I used to joke that I had this tattoo on my forehead that said, "Bring it on." I grew up Southern Baptist, and there are a number of religions that would have us believe that we're all sinners and we have no control over that. And I disagree with that. My spiritual journey has gone a little apart from organized religion.
There's a power within us that you have to find and tap into, and you've tapped into it, and it takes, I love this quote, no one is exempt from suffering, but everyone is entitled to healing. And I love that quote.
Yeah, thank you. It's that was one of the first sort of things that came to me. And one of the things that I realized early on in my journey is that, I'd heard stories, and all of our listeners have heard about, Grandma Jane or Aunt Susie or the neighbor lady down the street who had a miscarriage or whose son died, was never the same again, and never lived again, or something happened and they never recovered. And so I saw, and I just knew too many people get stuck in grief because grief is the only benchmark that we have. And, it comes back to what you and I talked about before the show started, Will, was, how we compare. And that's why my focus is on how we heal, because it's how do we help people from getting stuck in that conflict and grief pattern. So
love it.
Yeah, it's, I'm hoping that it will be the wave of the future. Great regard and many friends that I've met and associates through, who are in the bereavement industry. And when I say that, people are like, "What?" And I'm like, yeah, there really is a full grief industry, bereavement industry. And I'm grateful for the fact that we've come so far in being able to have these conversations. I mean, you two gentlemen, mental illness can create grief, and many elements of grief. And so you two are knocking it out of the park. I mean, two guys talking about this, breaking the stigma. I mean, I have so much regard for what you do. And I'm grateful for all the walls and barriers that are just being blown apart when it comes to grief. And yet I hear, and it's a common term in parental loss, parents who've lost a child, and that is that child loss is the worst loss. And I'm like, that's not true. It doesn't have to be true. And when you're telling people that, you are setting them up for failure. Is it possible that it is the worst loss? Yes. May it feel like the worst loss at that time? Yes. But what I tell people is, when I found out that my husband and my best friend were having an affair, that grief, that loss felt equally significant to the death of my son. And I spent some time in that place with, well, I've already experienced the worst loss, so why am I crying over spilt milk? For God's sakes, it's just an affair.
Willingness has to be part of healing, right? You have to be willing to heal.
Yes. And I listened to, which I loved your intro, the conversation and the back and forth that you and Will had, or Tim had, on healing and into this whole series that you're doing. And you do have to have a willingness. I'm a little hesitant in using that word, because sometimes we think of willingness attached with willpower. In my example, I mean, I had a question and I was moving forward in healing, but didn't realize that I was willing to do that. Does that make sense? It was just very organic.
Sure, absolutely. But you were open, but you knew you were rock bottom. So, correct. and that was where I was pointing out that you have to be willing to accept that you're rock bottom. Because a lot of people don't accept that the bottom is full, and maybe the bottom hasn't technically, because I mean, obviously things can always get worse. No matter how bad things are, things can always compile and pile on.
They can, and they can always get better. Being open to that. And I think that's, so coming back to that quote that you said, Will, which is, no one is exempt from suffering and everyone is entitled to healing. One of the things that I found is our benchmark, right? Sort of our compass for healing has always been platitude. And a lot of platitude is faith-based, is scripture-based. And, some of it's not. And one of the classic ones that I use is, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And one of the things that platitude does is it leaves out the messy part in the middle. It takes us from pain to healing, right? But it leaves out the process, growth. And that's different for each one of us. And so one of the earlier things that I thought of, when I was exploring this, is that, we have people of all different faiths, all different beliefs, all different religions. And is it that one particular God is the only God in which you can have redemption? And I'm like, I don't believe that. And we have people who are atheists. If someone doesn't believe in a God or something outside of them, does that mean that they're destined to suffer forever? I'm like, no, I don't believe that. And so that's where, the spiritual facet came in. And it truly is, I say it's the part of us that knows our hopes and dreams. It's the part of us that drives us. And I believe that that's the soul, that's the divine self. But it's not for me to dictate to anybody else what that represents to them. And so when I work with clients who come in, and I work with clients of all different businesses, like, where are you at? Where are you at? And I had a man that I was working with for a while who very much believed in the Bible and in scripture. And I mean, he could quote the Bible inside and out. And he was much like you guys, right? Just the nicest guy. And he had started dating a woman who his church didn't approve of. And they started punishing him. They started taking away roles. And, every fiber of me, and Will, I can feel your energy, right? Every fiber of me was just like, no, screaming. And yet I know that it's not for me to impose my thoughts on him. However, the way I approach it is, I say, first I asked him, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I feel like I'm being punished. And I'm like, well, what do you believe that that's something that Jesus would have done? I mean, and so many people in organized religion, look at Jesus as a different symbol than someone who's actually was a human.
I get it.
He looked at Jesus as a human, and he's like, that's not something Jesus would have done. And so then I will say, I have, my own thoughts, and I have some other concepts that I've been introduced to. May I share some of them with you? If anything resonates, take what resonates and works for you and create your own tapestry, discard the rest. And it's been very successful.
I think that's important. I think that's what both of us push a lot as well, is, take a bit from here, take a bit from there, take what you can, listen to everything, and whatever works for you, that's what you do. There's no right or wrong way per se. If it works for you and it doesn't harm you or harm others, do that.
Exactly. And here's the even more beautiful thing, Tim, and that is that what works today, you may say, oh yeah, this resonates with me, and I'm going to go with this. And you find out a week from now, a year from now, it's like, wow, I've grown, I've learned more. That's not quite, that doesn't quite vibe with me anymore. Or we can tailor it, right? We can adapt it, we can mold it. Things are amenable.
I agree. It kind of actually goes with something that I really wanted to ask, because I know you speak a lot of adversity, and you said earlier about how we all kind of have it inside of us. And I guess it's kind of a two-part question, but do you think we all have like a standard or a set resilience? And also, do you think we can build up our resilience? And how would you suggest to our viewers or our listeners to build up some resilience?
Wow. And so I'm currently taking an iridology certification program. And iridology is the study of the color and structure of the eye that gives us insight into our genetic predisposition to certain things in life. It's so cool. One of the things in that is that through the color and structure of the eye, we can tell a person's resilience. So to answer that question, I do think that some of us, for whatever reason, genetic, physical, spiritual predisposition, have more resilience. And that blew me away in that part of the program. That said, I also believe that we can learn about our own constitutions, and what I say is put it to work for us. So these 5 facets, again, it's part of a program, but it's helping people identify who you are, what drives you, and then building on those things. So the 5 facets actually exist in a hierarchy.
Okay, I was just going to ask you if you could name the 5 facets for everyone.
Yeah, so coming back to that, it's the academic, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual sides of the self. They exist in a hierarchy that's unique to each of us. At the top of that hierarchy is one particular facet that just like it's enmeshed in everything that we do. It's the lens from which we see and be. We don't have to think about it. It's always there. We go down the hierarchy to the bottom, which is the facet, which is least what I say in your face, right? It's just, it really doesn't have an impact on a lot. And yet I liken it to the foundation of your house, right? So it's at the bottom is your foundation of the house. What happens when you don't take care of the foundation of your house, right? It crumbles. Here's what happens. And I'll just give like a very quick overview for myself. When I first tested this theory out on myself, I was like, well, the 2 things that are constantly in my face that drive my suffering and my success, which is interesting because what's at the top drives both of those things. So I had the academic facet and the social facet. I'm a people person. I love connecting with people. It rocks my world. And yet I'm also a person that asks questions, which, the millions of questions that led me to where I am. So pardon the pun, but you can't have a dead heat tie when there's a hierarchy. So then I thought, okay, where do I go to get my answer?
Gotta go inside, right?
Well, no, I go to people. Well, inside, but I'm also a person. I go directly to other people. And I had a talented mental health professional once say to me, she was a social worker, and she said, yeah, well, everybody goes to people. The researchers go to people. I'm like, I know, except the difference is I don't go to academia. I don't go to books. I go to people. So if I have a question, something that I'm struggling with, I go to people and say, hey, have you ever experienced this? What are your thoughts? So for me, the social facet moved to the top of my hierarchy. And then the academic facet is next in line. Now, what that means is when I'm feeling alive and living my purpose, and I'm passionate and I'm fueled and I'm happy and I'm fulfilled, I'm doing what I'm doing right now. I'm connecting with people. I'm connecting on a truly just cellular cosmic level. I'm making a difference, or at least trying to, right? When I'm suffering, guess what's also in the mix? People. What are they thinking? Is the swear word that I use going to offend somebody? Am I going to lose that listener? And am I going to offend them? How is what I'm doing or saying going to impact them? Is it going to be positive or negative? And you get caught in that time warp, that overthinking. And yet now that I've done this work and I've applied it to myself, I can stop when I find myself in that loop. I can go, oh, that's right. That's the social facet. Okay, now what do I need in this moment? How can I manage that? What resources do I have that I can employ to help heal this conflict that I have right now? Because we're in that suffering, right? We need to heal it. What can I bring to the table? And coming back to the spiritual facet, I said earlier, religion can be a support tool for that, right? Each of the facets, we bring different support tools in. And then I get to choose, okay, what do I want to heal this conflict right now?
And it goes to prove that it really is all about asking questions, asking better questions, and finding how important the questions we ask are. And you don't realize how surface level most of them are, because that's what I've realized. We've realized that usually the surface emotion you're feeling is not really the emotion. There's usually 3, 4, maybe who knows how many layers of it that you got to get down to feel what you're really feeling. Because you might be feeling depressed, but it might not really be depression. It might be guilt. It might be something else.
And oftentimes it is actually, what I'm finding is it's oftentimes an underlying belief, or the different people look at it different. Some people will call it a subconscious thought. Some people will call it a belief. Oftentimes it's something underneath that then, which is also driving it. And when we can answer that question. So coming back to Tim's question, I know, Timothy, I went a long way around answering
It's
that
all right.
question. But so I do believe some of us are born with more genetic constitution resilience, as we would call it. And yet that doesn't mean that other people, we might be resilient in one area, like a physical constitution, and yet, there's other limitations that we have that offset that, because we can't be perfect in everything. So it's all about building on. You can build resilience. We just have to understand who we are, right? And accept who we are. Use our strengths to bring up our, for lack of a better word, weaknesses. And we tend to look at weakness as, oh, that's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. it's just, we can't be perfect and we can't be all things. So how do we manage what we have and to get through? And we all have that ability, period. End of discussion.
Do you think that a lot of this stems from our childhood? Do you think it's the programs that we've been subconsciously pre-programmed with? And when is the separation of that? Because I didn't realize that our brain was still developing at 27. And when I'm thinking at 27, what I was doing at 27, and my brain wasn't fully completely developed then, and with all the shit that I'd happened before then my brain was never going to be right. So like, is there a jump off point between where your childhood affects you and where you have to accept some willingness and responsibility for your own life?
I see that as a couple different questions. So number one, it's all things. It's the genetic and spiritual predisposition that we come into this world with. It's our childhood experiences. It's the conditioning that we experience all throughout our days. I don't think that it's any one thing. I think it's a combination of everything. And the reason I say that, and I think, again, we have to be very careful in how we label things, because you can take a person who, let's just say, I want to be sensitive to, our listeners, but let's just say childhood sexual abuse. And so for any listeners who have experienced that and are struggling with that, please know that you can be okay in the face of this. Just know that. You may not know how, but you can be. So you take one individual, and we may have another listener on the other side of that spectrum, somebody who's really struggling, and then we have, and they're carrying it with them for a long time, and they're not able to find what they need to find resolution in their conflict and grief, as I call it. And we may have another listener who's like, I experienced that and it fueled me. It fueled me to do something to where it's not limiting me anymore. So to say that it's any one experience, or if there's a jumping off point, I think it's unfair to society as a whole, because every person, again, based on their hierarchy, their resilience, their natural proclivity to resilience, they're going to respond differently, and they're going to associate and identify with that experience differently. And that's, I think, the greatest pieces of this work that I do in healing. And again, coming back to that quote, no one is exempt from suffering, but everyone is entitled to healing. And what creates suffering for one person is different than someone else.
Very, very nicely put. Thank you very much. And thank you for being sensitive about that.
I think that piece right there that you just left us with is a big variable in it, right? Is this, I let's say I would look at a therapist, okay? And, they help me, and they do this, and they know this, and they're very knowledgeable, and they have credentials. So I think in this culture we live in, we look at this person and assume all across the board that they're okay, and they have this resilience that's from A to Z. And that's not the case. It's exactly what you said. It's, I could be good at this, but I could be bad at this. Something that could happen to you, a trauma that happened to you, we could sit here and go, oh my gosh, that's the worst. And you survived it and was like, you know what, that wasn't really the worst. So I think it's, maybe understanding, maybe that there's a communication comprehension problem that we might be missing in the mix, that we're missing. And more people, I think more people are susceptible to these things. Just more people are susceptible to illness, and then whatever path they take, whatever life experiences they have, are going to either be a positive or a negative effect on that susceptibility, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Well, and there's also perception, right? And that's coming back to the very first component of this 5 Facets program. is back to basics. And one of the major 5 language and lifestyle barriers that hold us in conflict and grief is perception, how we perceive things. And what I can tell you is when I was severely depressed, I was having suicide ideations on the daily. I was plotting suicide and how I could complete suicide and make it look like an accident so I wouldn't leave my children with the stigma of having a mother who committed suicide. And one day I went into my counselor and I told him, this is how I can make that happen. And he's like, if you wanted to be dead, you'd be dead by now. The truth is, you don't want to die, you want to live. And that was profound for me. Now, while all of that was happening, I was running a very successful business. I was involved in my children's schools. I was a parent mom. I was a sports mom. I mean, you name it. I was running a successful business. I was raising money for charity. People were coming in and telling me how great I was. Everybody perceived that, and Tim, I don't know if you prefer Tim or Timothy, I'm sorry, but coming back.
Either thing, you call me anything you want, just don't call me late for dinner.
Oh my God. You don't know how many times I've said that. You don't know how many times I've said that. Yeah. Anyway, people perceived that I had this just beautiful life and everything that was going on, and people had no clue that I was struggling with that every single day.
That's where that, even your own perception of you, that's where it's all an inside job. If so many people can come up and tell you whatever they want, and it really truly doesn't matter unless you believe it, unless you believe what you are, unless your thoughts are more caring and more compassionate and more serving to your life.
Yeah. And what this counselor also pointed out to me, he's like, it doesn't matter what other people say to you, no matter how many times people tell you you're gifted, you're talented, you're kind, you're amazing, you're brilliant, you're a community, like, if you don't believe it. And the other thing that he helped me realize is that I was actually making choices that validated what I felt inside, because what the outside world was telling me wasn't in alignment with what I believed. And so I had to prove to myself that I was right and they were wrong, basically. In a very simple, oversimplified statement. But yeah, we all have gifts within us. And what I say is, with the 5 facets, is the program is for me to help people again understand themselves and then learn how to put their gifts to work for them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Love it. I think that, as Will likes to say, I'm a big fan of one of the things that he likes to say, and it's we're all recovering from something. And it's, it's just a solid, truthful piece of information, because we all have something that we're trying to heal from, or that we need to heal from.
Do. And a lot of people use the word recovery, and so I have a great regard for that word. One thing I will say, in this work that I do, I use the word resolution. And I have a theory that, and I'm still working on sort of fleshing that out, but all conflict stems from some unresolved grief. And so I use the word resolution in conflict and grief. And the reason that I do that is because recovery in language actually has an element of getting something back. And that's when people have a significant loss. That's one, I want the past to come back. I want my happy marriage to come back. I want my child to come back to life. I want whatever it was. I want my job back. I want my house back. I want my health back. I want it, right? Whatever adversity, insert your whatever. We can't get that back. And so what we have to do is we have to be okay in the face of adversity. And one of the greatest gifts that I received was shortly after my son died, and I went back to work. And I worked in I managed an office where it was a customized industry. And so we worked with clients, I worked with them extensively. And when I went back to work, many of my customers didn't know my son had died, and they would come in and they'd be all happy, and they're like, "Oh, how's the baby? It's so good to see you." And the only words, guys, that could come out of my mouth was, "I'm sorry he didn't make it." And immediately you see the look of terror, and you see them kind of back away like they've just, heard something unimaginable, which they have. Their hands would twitch. And I would reach across the counter and pat their hands and say, "It's okay." I was becoming the consoler. And one day this woman said to me, when I said that to her, she replied to me, "No, it's not okay." And I didn't realize the profound impact on that it had on me until years later, when I was actually writing Digging for the Light. And I use that now. Whatever adversity you're going through is not okay, but you can be okay in the face of it.
As someone is going through this process currently, what is the first question that someone can ask themselves? Is there a first step to this that we can offer somebody to say, this is a question you should ask yourself if you're in this position right now?
So if I may, I'm just gonna elaborate a little bit. So in every one-on-one that I do, every presentation I give across the country, I start with 4 questions. And if I may, if you have the time, I'd like to do that, because I think
absolutely. Let's go through.
So the first question is, and I ask people, answer this without censoring it in 1 or 2 words. What is loss? So if you and Timothy would answer that, what is loss to each of you? 1 or 2 words without censoring it.
Hard.
1 or 2 words. I would say confusing.
Okay. The second question is, what is grief?
The ability, the feeling of not having any control over anything.
I would say an absence of something.
Okay. The third question is, what is healing?
Regaining a sense of self.
Moving forward, moving through.
Okay. So for you and for each of our listeners who have answered that question, if you notice what is loss and what is grief, they're pretty much overlap. And in our culture, we use the term loss and grief as synonymous. And first, it's important. And so coming back to tips and tools, guys, and resources, I think the first and foremost important thing is to understand that loss, grief, and healing are autonomous. And so I've created 3 definitions for each. First, loss is an event. It's an event where someone or something that had meaning to us has gone missing from our life. Grief is our individual response to that loss event. And healing is, which I've already said, the resolution of the conflict and that comprises our grief. So the first thing, coming back to your question, then, would be to try and separate those things out. because when we intermingle loss and grief, then it all gets very convoluted and confusing. And and I tell you, I worked with professionals, social work conferences, everybody, loss and grief is entwined. So first of all, identify those three things. What is my loss event? And there's no right or wrong. What is my grief response? How am I feeling? So then coming back to, what's the one thing, the one question that I could offer somebody once they've disseminated, separated, identified those first two things, then you can say, what do I want to heal? And because then it makes it manageable. It's not so overwhelming. What one thing right now do I want or need? And I have a very simple form, and I can send it to you guys. I don't know, you can link it down below, but it's a very brief assessment that lists each of those 5 facets. What am I feeling right now? Where's my conflict? Is it in the academic facet, emotional facet, physical, social, spiritual? Where is it? And you can tick them off, and then you get to say, which is empowering, right? We get to choose. And in your intro to the series, Tim shared the part of the 5 steps of healing. Choose grief, choose acceptance, choose your facets, choose healing, and choose vitality. But choice is empowering, right? Then you get to say, okay, what one thing do I want to work on right now?
I actually have, I want to add a quick question, but just because something you said early on in the beginning, and we connected. I don't know.
The title for my first book, Digging for the Light, it was actually a line in the book that said, sometimes I was buried alive with grief and suffering, and sometimes I clawed digging for the light. And that's one of the things that we say is we're buried alive, right? When we feel like, we're at rock bottom, I'm just buried alive in grief and suffering. And it was not lost on me. You guys say you cannot serve below, you can only serve above ground. So my whole thing in digging for the light, right, is you're buried alive and you're clawing your way to the surface, to the light, and your title above ground. Just the imagery of the two, right, and how they sort of align. Some people may not understand that. Hopefully,
yeah, for sure. Wow. Thank you for sharing. That's
much
profound to me.
Much gratitude for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. You can't serve from below. You can't. Right. And I believe our soul comes here for 3 reasons. 1, to learn particular life lessons through experience. 2, to serve the world around us in some capacity. And 3, to ascend. And every time we learn and serve, we ascend, and our ultimate ascension is when our soul leaves this body.
Do you have a favorite or a least favorite word?
Yes, so I knew these were coming. So I have favorites and least favorites for different reasons, right? So there's not one, but probably one of my least favorite words is can't. Because it means we're not able, we don't have the ability, and that's contradictory to what I believe. I believe that we all have the ability. So for this context right now, probably can't would be my least favorite, and can would be my most favorite.
I'm gonna actually stick with my original question that I've been switching this up a little bit here and there, because there's other fun questions that I like to ask that give you a little bit more insight into people sometimes and their creativity and stuff. But I'm gonna stick with the original. Do you have a spirit animal? And are you an animal lover? And do you have a pet? And is it cat, dog, or other?
So all of the things. I don't surprisingly, I'm not in touch with my spirit animal. If I had to guess, it's a tiger. From the time I was a little girl, I've always said if it were legal to have a pet tiger, I'd have a pet tiger. I've always had a fascination with tigers, and they symbolize strength, and not brute strength, but inner strength. That would be my guess, is that my spirit animal, one of them is the tiger. I've had all the pets. This is the first time in my life that I've been without a pet. Dogs and horses are probably my most favorite, but I've had horses, cats, dogs, a pet snake named Fluffy, a ball python named Fluffy. I was introduced to this concept that animals come to this planet for two reasons: one, to be a part of the ecosystem, and one, to be healers for humans.
So the last question, if there is something that you could do or that you would like to see done for mental health as a whole without any kind of restraint, what would it be?
Hands down, it would be, we need to start educating our children at a young age and making them aware that they have everything within them they need to heal whatever ails them, that they're born with it, to let them know that there is possibility and there is promise and there's more than one option, and that everybody has their own path. I mean, unfortunately, we grow up. Will asked this question earlier, do I think it's our childhood that causes certain things, or and that's a part of it, right? And everybody is different, and we don't have to believe hook, line, and sinker what our parents believe. Again, everybody's their own way. I think that children need to know that there's promise and possibility and hope, and some, for whatever reasons, some children aren't getting that at home. How we do that, I don't know. I'd like to see it in the schools, but with No Child Left Behind, it's taken out a lot of the emotional, social connection pieces that I think are critical to growth. But yeah, hands down. And I actually had the privilege of working with a nonprofit called Scared Sidless in Texas a couple of years ago, and I've created a program for children, a little theme song for the 5 facets, and one of my goals is to really roll that out at a later date and get involved with some people. But our children, I think, it's kind of like, if you've heard in the medical field that you've got to treat pain before it becomes pain, right? Before it becomes so intense, because once you reach the level of pain, it's that much harder to treat it. It takes longer and more effort to treat it. So the same kind of holds true for our children. If they're not aware that there's possibility and promise, and that there's lots of options out there, by the time they get to be 27, 28, 30, and their brains are fully developed and they don't know that these things exist, then it just compounds. So yeah, help our children know these things early on.
We appreciate so much you being here. Annah Elizabeth is on AnnahElizabeth.com. True?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Anna
And
with an H and Elizabeth with a Z. So ANNAH, Elizabeth.com, or the 5 Facets of Healing.com, all spelled out.
love it. And she's also has a book called Digging for the Light, which is available on Amazon and available through your website and wherever fine books are sold.
Yeah. Yep, as the saying goes. Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen, again, for the amazing work that you do every day. And honestly, for the privilege and honor of just being a part of what you do.
Timmy, wow.
Wow.
Damn, dude. What a get. That was, I mean, wow.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff in there for people to listen to take it further and check out the links and research and further what they already have inside of them. Let it come out.
Absolutely. And I on this big note, if you've gotten anything from these shows, please drop us drop us a line, send an email to abovegroundpodcast@gmail.com, which by the time you hear this episode, that may have changed, but we're working on that right now. But you can also buy the show a coffee. We now have a Buy Me a Coffee page, which Buy Me a Coffee is a service for creators like Patreon, and we are on there now. So if you really like the show, you can donate to the show that way. And you can find us on all the socials. And 2022 is looking amazing, and we have all kinds of cool guests coming and cool conversations. So please join us for everything. You can find us on all the socials at Above Ground Podcast or Above Ground Pod, because sometimes you just have to put it as pod because it doesn't fit. So until next week, be well,
Be safe,
be above.